Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. You were never supposed to see this, but since you have, you might as well wear it. From the vaults of the shadows, a new collection of unsettling apparel and artifacts pulled straight from the stories that were never meant to surface. Soft, worn-in shirts and hoodies that feel like something you dug out of a locked trunk in an abandoned ranger station. This isn't just merch, it's evidence. The Sound in the Rocks, a geologist's final transmission, Chapter 1. The island assignment. They didn't send her with a team. Dr. Erin Pike stepped off the transport boat with one duffel, a hard case full of seismic sensors, and a growing sense that this wasn't just another data collection trip. The wind off the Pacific bit cold through her coat, sharp with salt, and a briny rot that clung to the rocks like moss. Behind her, the boat didn't linger. It reversed with a mechanical groan and churned back into the slate-grey waves, disappearing into the rising fog. The island had no name, just a coordinate cluster and a shipping code. Less than 2 miles long, dense with fir and pine, broken only by jagged sea cliffs and rock shelves pockmarked with tide pools. It didn't appear on tourist maps. No one she asked in Seattle had even heard of it. But the university's Department of Earth Sciences had received an anonymous tip 3 weeks ago, unusual subsurface vibrations on an inactive fault line. Steady, rhythmic pulses, the kind that shouldn't exist. She was the only field geologist available. Or maybe she was the only one who said yes. The university had leased the only structure on the island, an old, moss-covered research cabin, originally built in the 70s for a now-defunct marine biology station. It looked like something forgotten. Wood swollen with moisture, windows streaked with lichen. The stairs creaked like vertebrae as she stepped onto the porch. Inside, it smelled of pine cleaner, mold, and something older. The generator worked. The heater groaned to life. There was water, barely, but no cell signal. The satellite radio sat on a dusty shelf like a promise. Erin unpacked slowly, methodically. She was 37, sharp-minded, and used to solitude. Earthquakes didn't wait for committee meetings. She preferred fieldwork to lecturing. Here, she didn't have to talk to anyone. She could listen, to soil, to rock, to subtle shifts in crust tension. The island, however, didn't feel dormant. Outside, wind scratched at the eaves. Somewhere behind the cabin, crows bickered in a tree. The forest looked tight and too still, like it was holding its breath. When Erin ran her fingers along the deck railing, the wood pulsed faintly beneath her hand. She told herself it was her imagination. But that night, when she laid in bed beneath the humming heater, the vibration returned. Not under the cabin, under her. A deep, deliberate rhythm, not tectonic, not random. It came in 3-beat patterns like a pulse, like a knock from the other side of the stone. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Shale. Erin woke to the sound of gulls screaming at the sky. Light bled through the warped window slats in heavy streaks, casting her sleeping bag in faded stripes of grey and white. She'd slept poorly, too light, too alert. The rhythmic tremor beneath the cabin had stopped sometime before dawn, but it left its impression. Her chest still felt the beat of it, like the echo of a distant drum that no longer played. She dressed in layers, thermal, canvas, waterproof, and packed her survey gear into her pack. 3 seismic sensors, each no larger than a paperback book, will be placed at different sites around the island to triangulate any future vibrations. That was the job. Record, analyze, report. But this place already felt like it wasn't going to behave. Her boots crunched through the thick bed of damp pine needles as she made her way down the overgrown trail toward the southern cliffs. The trees here leaned in toward each other, narrow-limbed, their roots gripping the soil like claws. There were no birds deeper in, just the wind. Half an hour in, the first sensor went live. She placed it in a shallow depression between 2 knuckled stones and tested the signal. It blinked green once, then began its slow, silent listening. The second sensor took longer. She had to descend a muddy ravine lined with slick rock and eelgrass, her boots nearly slipping more than once. At the bottom, a broad tide pool sat cupped in the earth like a dark mirror. The water barely moved. No kelp, No fish, just stillness, a silence that pressed outward. She felt watched suddenly, not by anything above the surface, but below it. Erin shook it off and placed the second sensor in the shale near the edge of the pool. She checked its signal, nothing, dead. She adjusted the angle, cleared debris, tried again, still nothing. Then, just as she reached to retrieve it, the sensor lit up. But the signal wasn't consistent. It pulsed. Long, long, short. Pause. Long, long, short. She frowned, pulled out her notepad, and jotted the pattern down instinctively. It repeated 3 times, then stopped altogether. The green light vanished. Nothing more. Seismic interference, she muttered. Maybe a buried gas pocket. Or a fault echo. It didn't sound convincing, not even to herself. Erin packed up and moved on to the third site, close to the cliffside facing the ocean. Here, wind howled like a thing trapped between the trees. She kept her head low, her hood drawn tight. When she reached the edge, the surf below crashed with deafening rhythm. Whitecaps gnawed the rocks like teeth. The final sensor slid into place easily. Signal clean, no interruptions. She stood there for a moment longer than she meant to, gazing out at the endless slate of water. There was something about it, not its size, but its weight. The pressure it seemed to exert even from a distance. The horizon didn't look real. It looked like the inside of a lid closing over them all. As she turned to go, a flicker of movement in the corner of her eye made her freeze. There, down on the rocks, something hunched near the surf, pale-skinned, motionless, too large to be a seal. It was half submerged in a narrow crevice where the tide rolled in and out, unmoving despite the surge of water. No flippers, no fur. Its spine arched unnaturally high, like a question mark. She raised her field glasses, breath tight in her throat. But by the time they reached her eyes, nothing was there. Just the pool, the rocks, the sea foaming angrily in retreat. Erin stood there for several minutes, her eyes watering from the cold, before finally turning back toward the cabin. She didn't mention the figure in her daily report. She only wrote down one thing. Sensor 2 received a patterned vibration. Repeating, sequence, long, long, short, possibly man-made, possibly not. That night, lying in the dark, the heater off, the generator quiet, Erin began to hear something else. A low sound, far away, beneath the island, a tonal vibration. It wasn't the same rhythm as the tremors. This one rose and fell like a voice, like singing. Chapter 3. Tectonic drift. Erin awoke to the wind scratching at the windows like salt-laced fingers. Outside, the skies had broken into a seething overcast, smeared with gull-grey clouds. She took her coffee black and steaming, eyes lingering on the small rain-streaked window of the ranger cabin that now served as her base of operations. The island's outline, craggy cliffs and pine-covered slopes, looked as though it had been sketched hastily in charcoal. Jagged, lonely. She hiked the northern ridge by mid-morning, carrying her sampling equipment. A handheld seismometer, geophone probes, a core drill strapped to her back like a metal spine. The trailhead was soft with old pine needles, and the deeper she went, the more the island seemed to swallow sound. The birds grew quiet. The ocean, though still visible in bursts through the trees, sounded miles away. No crashing waves. Just that low, almost imperceptible hum she was starting to notice when she paused too long. The first test site was a stony bluff above the sea, part of a known coastal shear zone. She drove the geophone spikes into the ground, careful and deliberate, watching the data stream scroll across her tablet. At first, nothing, just wind interference. Then rhythms, not tremors, not in the usual sense. These pulses had intervals, steady, intentional, like someone playing a melody beneath the crust. A new line of thought began to thread its way through Erin's geological training. These weren't the chaotic spasms of natural movement. These were signatures, a pattern too slow for footsteps, too structured for tectonic creep, almost like breathing. She checked and rechecked the equipment, ran baselines. Nothing pointed to malfunction. As she made her second round down a narrow gully choked with lichen-covered boulders, she found something else, a split in the rock face. A long, clean fissure, only visible at a certain angle. It didn't appear on any geological survey she'd studied. Inside it, the stone walls had been polished smooth, as if worn down by water. but there was no evidence of water flow, not a single trace of sediment or moss, only the feeling of passage, ooze. At the base of the split, near a bend where sunlight failed to reach, she found 3 items: a single rubber boot caked with barnacle growth, a rusted metal whistle wrapped in kelp, a thin, chalk-white handprint on the stone wall, child-sized, faintly damp. Erin backed away slowly, heart thudding. For the first time since arriving, she regretted not bringing the emergency beacon from the ranger station. She returned to the cabin by dusk, dripping with fog and unease. The samples were logged, the gear dried and stored. But all night, the seismic monitor, plugged into the ground beneath the porch, clicked at odd intervals, like a Morse code she hadn't learned, like something beneath the island was learning her instead. Chapter 4. Low Tide Signal. If you listen too long, it starts listening back. The next morning, Erin found the air almost metallic, wet and sharp like the inside of a battery. The weather had turned overnight. Rain had stopped, but the fog clung to the treetops like it had grown roots. Every breath felt muffled, every step cushioned by a silence that wasn't natural. She decided to return to the cliffside. There was something there, beneath the rhythm of the seismic pulses, beneath the data streams and geological sense. Something she couldn't quite explain but needed to verify. Something calling. The tide was at its lowest around 5 a.m., and she reached the edge of the water just before then, boots squelching over kelp-covered stones. The exposed coastline looked alien under the early twilight, tide pools glinting like empty eyes, barnacle-covered rocks protruding like ribs from the shore. Erin unpacked the portable hydrophone kit. If the sound was beneath the island, maybe it wasn't only in the rock. Maybe it came through the water too. She lowered the sensor into a still pool caught between jagged shale. The tablet hissed to life. The feed was mostly static at first, crackles of distant current, the distant scrape of shifting silt. Then a low pulse, then another, measured, breathing. Her heart beat once. The tone matched it, again and again. Thud, thud, thud. It wasn't echo, it was synchronization. The pulse was mirroring her. Her hands shook as she adjusted the gain on the receiver. As she did, something moved beneath the water. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't even swimming. She leaned in. Just beyond the shimmer of the surface, nestled in the shadow of the pool's base, there was a face. Pale, eyeless, long and pinched like a wax figure half melted. Not submerged, not exactly, but clinging to the underside of the rock like it had been waiting for someone to look in. She staggered back, fell, scrambled away from the water's edge, her boot slipping on kelp. The sensor floated loose, yanked back into the tide with a hiss. She didn't try to retrieve it. From the bluff above, the wind carried a sound like a long, low whistle, 3 notes, just like the rusted one she'd found wrapped in kelp the day before. When she returned to the cabin, Erin locked the door and placed her remaining equipment in a neat circle on the floor. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She only replayed the tone again and again on her backup recorder, watching the lines form the same breathless pattern. And through the white noise just beneath the rhythm, a second tone had begun to emerge, slightly off, slightly delayed, like something answering her back. Chapter 5. The Hollow Survey. The island isn't dead rock, it's a cavity, and something inside it is still moving. The next morning, Erin set out earlier than usual, hoping to reach the southern ridge before the fog thickened. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but the need to understand, to quantify what she'd heard, burned hotter than fear. She followed the same trail skirting the coast, but turned sharply inland when she reached a stone marker. A weather-worn pillar with ancient lichen patterns that looked vaguely like concentric spirals. It hadn't been on her topographical map. None of the locals had mentioned it either. The land here rose in strange undulations, as though the entire hill had once been liquid and frozen mid-collapse. Trees leaned away from the ridge unnaturally, branches bowing from unseen pressure. It didn't make geological sense. She reached the highest point of the ridge by noon and set up the geophone array, a series of spike-like sensors driven into the earth to monitor subterranean vibrations. Each one whined faintly as it synced with her tablet. The moment she calibrated the last one, the screen lit up. Readings poured in, shallow tremors, no deeper than 20 meters. That was wrong. The bedrock on this island should have been older than the Miocene, stable, fossilized, and deeply rooted. But these signals were shallow, rhythmic, and more disturbing, mobile. She watched one signal travel from west to east in a slow arc, the vibrations rising in amplitude as it neared the cliff she had visited the night before. It wasn't a fault line. It was a track, a path. Her gut turned. Erin yanked open her field journal and sketched the movement overlaying a terrain grid. As she compared it to the coastline map, something clicked. The rhythm, the movement, it all converged on one area, a hollow. On her initial scans of the island, she dismissed it, a depression in the seismic profile that didn't match any cave system or known erosion. But now she realized it wasn't a void due to missing material. It was a chamber. Something was inside it. She tried to radio the mainland for backup. The line crackled. A distorted voice came through briefly, but the words weren't intelligible, more like a recording played backwards. Then the line cut out entirely. She packed the sensors up in a rush, her hands clumsy, heart pounding with the same pulse she'd heard in the rocks. But even as she moved, she felt the ground change beneath her. Soft, resonant, as if the island had gone from solid to hollow overnight. Like she was walking on a drumhead stretched too thin. Something beneath her was shifting, not in violent jolts, but in deliberate turns, rotations, adjustments, not seismic, not tectonic, intentional. She didn't stop walking until the cabin came into view through the trees. The porch light was on. She hadn't left it that way. Inside, everything was exactly where she'd left it, except for one thing, the rusted whistle. It now sat upright in the center of her bed, damp, freshly salted. The logs she'd recorded earlier that morning had been overwritten. Now they played only the rhythm, and her voice, but reversed, repeating 3 words she had never said. "Come see us." Chapter 6, Tuning Forks. You don't realize how deep something goes until it echoes from inside you. Erin barely slept that night. The strange vibrations hadn't stopped. If anything, they intensified. At first, she thought it was in the ground again. But it wasn't. It was in her teeth. A subtle pressure at the roots, like standing near a subwoofer, humming not with bass but pattern. She tried chewing gum, tried drinking water. Nothing helped. The moment she laid still, it pulsed back up, measured, repetitive, as though something was tuning her. By morning, her face looked drawn, eyes purpled at the edges from lack of rest. She didn't record a voice memo. She didn't trust what would come out. Instead, she returned to the ridge, drawn back to the point of convergence. Her mind kept returning to the hollow chamber beneath the southern slope. How the vibrations didn't radiate outward like an explosion, but rotated like gears in a watch, pushing through the bedrock without resistance. The deeper she got into the thicket, the more the landscape felt curated. Not natural, but arranged. Logs fallen in spirals. Stones clustered in rings. Trees growing at mirrored angles. Even the moss grew in waves, tight, controlled patterns, as if the island's surface was a skin carefully arranged over something underneath. It wasn't until she reached a dried runoff crevice, one she hadn't noticed before, that she found the opening. A fissure in the earth no wider than her shoulders, angled down like a gullet. Cold air drifted from within, but not with the damp, algae-laced scent of sea caves. This smelled metallic, like brine left on iron. Old, breathing copper. The geologist in her hesitated. The rest of her leaned in. She dropped a small sensor probe into the crack. The screen lit up as the vibration data poured in, but the pattern wasn't linear. It looped, oscillated, reverberated. The readings shouldn't have been possible. Not for a natural cavern. It was as though the entire space beneath was acting like a resonating chamber, a tuning fork designed for something to feel sound, not just hear it. When she placed her palm against the rocks, she didn't feel cold. She felt breath. A hot exhale through stone. That's when she heard it again. A tone not audible at first, but felt deep in her ribs. It wasn't a note. It was a suggestion of one. A fragment of song. Then a second layer harmonized with it. Then a third. They built like a siren ascending a spiral, and suddenly Erin was no longer kneeling at the edge of a fissure. She was falling inward, eyes open, heart in sync, pulse answering the signal without her permission. She jerked back just in time to stop herself from crawling in. The song cut off instantly, as if it had been waiting to pull her in the moment she surrendered. She staggered back up the trail, her mouth dry, head ringing. But the echo remained inside her. She could still hear it, just barely, like it had impressed itself into her inner ear. She checked the sensor readout. It had captured nothing. But her field mic, it had. And when she hit playback, the recording was different than what she remembered. It wasn't music. It was a voice. A woman's voice, low, distant, submerged beneath static, repeating 5 words in perfect rhythm with her heartbeat. You are already below. Chapter 7. The harmonic eye. Some frequencies don't just carry sound, they carry intention. Erin didn't remember driving back to the research cabin. 1 minute she was crouched on the trail, still reeling from what she'd heard in the recorder. The next, she was inside, door locked, lights off, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her laptop open in front of her. The voice repeated again in her headphones. You are already below. It didn't change. No fluctuation. No background noise beyond that steady, gravel-dense whisper. But when she isolated the waveform, something unexpected showed up in the spectrogram. A faint spiral hidden in the signal. Not a waveform pattern. A shape, curving inward, looping in on itself like a conch shell. And embedded deep in that curve was a single, pulsing light point, like a blinking eye. When she scrubbed the audio backward, the pattern moved. Not just reversed, it shifted, changed shape, as if it was watching her watch it. She slammed the laptop shut. Her ears rang with silence, but she couldn't shake the sound. It hadn't left her. She felt it still, vibrating behind her eyes, where the image of that spiraling signal now sat like a brand. Later that night, Erin sat at the table with the topographic map of the island spread before her, marking the sensor data points with a red pen. What started as scattered data across the terrain was beginning to form a web. An interlocked, circular pattern she hadn't noticed before. Concentric zones radiating out from the cliffs where she'd found the fissure. In the center of that pattern, just past the inland brushline, was a small tidal alcove listed only as Anchor's Moor. She'd heard of it. Barely. One of the rangers had mentioned it in passing. An unstable sea cave collapsed decades ago, too dangerous to survey. The entire area marked off on official maps, yet the sensor pulses from that direction were strongest, moory frequent, moory deliberate. When Erin keyed in a request for more historical geological data from the USGS terminal, the archive froze. An error flashed on screen. Access restricted. This site requires secondary clearance. No password option, no override, just a hard stop. Frustrated, she pulled up local news archives instead, digging through old newspapers for anything about Anchor's Moor. She only found one story, yellowed and half-scanned. 1954, local diver found after missing 3 days in tidal cave. He claims he followed a song. Something in the stone. Said it told him his lungs would work underwater, and he believed it. They pulled him out in time. Said his body hadn't drowned, but something else had filled the lungs. Said the ocean was waiting to be listened to properly. He never spoke again after that. No follow-up, no name given. The diver disappeared from public record. Erin sat back, hands trembling. The rhythmic pressure in her chest returned, not painful, coaxing. And now it wasn't alone. She heard something else outside. At first it sounded like the ocean shifting through the rocks, a gentle wash. But then the cadence changed. Not fluid, wet footsteps. She flicked the exterior light on. The yard was empty, trees motionless. Then came the knock. One slow tap against the back window. She stood, not breathing, the echo of the tap still moving through her. She didn't look, couldn't. Instead, she backed into the hallway and ducked into the bathroom, locking the door. She pressed her ear to the wall, listening. Tap, tap, then a soft scrape, like something dragging a limb. When the sound stopped, Erin forced herself to look into the bathroom mirror. Her reflection was pale, frightened, but something was off. Her chest was pulsing, not visibly, but internally. And in the mirror behind her, just for a second, the hallway didn't look like the cabin anymore. It looked like a grotto, sea dark, stone-walled, lined with coral. And standing just outside the door, motionless, was a tall, thin shape with salt-matted hair, black skin veined with phosphorescence, and no eyes. Just smooth bone where sockets should be. Erin turned. Nothing was there, but the mirror still showed the hallway. The tide had come in, and it had brought something back. Chapter 8. Anchors More. If the island has a mouth, then the rocks are its teeth, and they are grinding something down. The next morning, Erin Pike woke up to silence. No seagulls, no wind, no rhythmic pulse beneath her ribs. Only an oppressive stillness that clung to the walls of the cabin like condensation. The air smelled faintly of copper and wet limestone, and the window panes were streaked, not with rain, but with something like sea foam, dried and spattered, as if sprayed from below. She checked the recorder. The audio file from last night was still there, but when she played it back, all she heard was static. Beneath the distortion, barely audible, a single phrase repeated again and again. Bring the core, bring the core, bring the core. She didn't remember recording that, but the words stirred something old inside her. The seismograph core sample, black shale streaked with quartz, sat in a lead-lined case beneath her desk. She had collected it from near the fissure the day she first arrived, assuming it was just a sample of metamorphic bedrock. But now its layers looked unnatural, too fine, too ordered. And when she touched the outer casing, the hum in her bones returned. That same tone, the one she thought she'd imagined. Whatever was in that core wasn't geological, not entirely. It responded, and it wanted her to bring it back. Later that day, Erin set off toward Anchors More. She didn't tell anyone. There was no one left to tell. The ferry wouldn't return for another week, and the rangers hadn't answered her calls in 3 days. The forest trail was overgrown, branches forming a quiet canopy that muffled her footsteps. Every now and then, she'd hear a rustle, a distant splash, or a low, tonal one from the rock beneath her boots. Not quite an earthquake, moory like a warning. She reached the boundary marker at dusk. Rusted metal signage barely legible through moss. Unstable CCAVES. Entry forbidden. Erin stepped past the barrier. The entrance to Anchors More was smaller than expected. An irregular split in the cliffside where the ocean had gnawed into basalt and pulled the stone into a jagged crescent. She descended slowly, her boots crunching over shattered shells and long-dead coral until the light behind her dimmed. The cave narrowed into darkness. And there it was again, that sound, not wind, not waves, a song, simple, repetitive, barely more than a humming, but it had structure, bars and measures, timing and space, a composition older than language. Erin switched on her headlamp. The cave walls shimmered with mineral deposits that pulsed in time with the rhythm. Crystalline veins beat like distant sonar. As she pressed deeper, she saw markings etched into the rock, not natural striations. Carvings, symbols, spirals, echoes of the waveform she'd seen on her laptop. And then, at the deepest point, she found the opening. Not a dead end, not a collapse. A deliberate tunnel, nearly round, bored cleanly through the cliff face like a drill made from thought. Water lapped gently at the base. It wasn't flooded, but the tide was rising. Erin stepped closer and heard it again. Not the song, a voice. Wet, ancient, neither male nor female. You brought it, the first to hear without drowning. Come now. Beneath, Erin clutched the core sample to her chest. The quartz was glowing softly, vibrating in her grip like a tuning fork. She knew what she should do. Back away. Leave. Warn someone. But the voice in her head was no longer foreign. It felt like hers. She stepped into the water. And behind her on the cave wall, her shadow bent wrong, arms too long, spine too bowed, head crowned with what looked like gills. Chapter 9. The fault that listens. Not everything buried is silent. Some things wait, and some things remember. Erin Pike did not surface the next day. Her field laptop was found weeks later by a salvage crew, recovered from a washed-up case on the stony beach a mile from Anchors More. Its casing was warped from salt and time, but the drive remained intact. Inside were her logs, every seismic reading, every cryptic tone she'd recorded, every diagram, waveform, and note, along with a final unsent message left open on the desktop. It's not a fault line, it's a channel. It's not breaking apart, it's listening. The island was made to hear, and it remembers us. If I don't make it back, don't try to retrieve me, don't send another. What I heard was real, and I think I answered it. Her belongings were shipped back to the mainland. The university quietly shuttered the site, citing budgetary cuts and environmental instability. Anchor's moor was fenced off. Satellite maps were blurred. The name Whitelith Cove was scrubbed from the academic archives, but the locals noticed something. The song, that eerie, low rhythm that once whispered through the tide pools, was gone. Or rather, it had moved, out to sea. Faint sonar readings from the coastal shelf showed a new pattern forming, a circular vibration, widening slowly, steadily, like a ripple from a stone dropped into water. Some say it's tectonic, some say it's the island breathing. And late at night, if you stand on the beach long enough and press your ear to the black rock, you might still hear her. Not screaming, not drowning, but humming. And if your heart starts to beat in rhythm with the song, don't listen. Don't hum back, and above all, do not follow it down. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.